For 5 long years, Amaka and Chuka prayed for one miracle, a child. And when that miracle finally arrived, it came wrapped in silence, fear, and a truth that could tear their marriage apart. Some blessings come with light, others arrive carrying shadows. This story contains themes of trauma and emotional distress. It is told carefully, respectfully, and without graphic details. Viewer discretion is advised. Welcome to African Tales by Chinwa, breathing life into African tales. Amaka and Chuka's home looked like a painting kissed by the gods. Sunlight always seemed to fall just right on the flowers Amaka planted by the windows, and laughter often escaped the compound like incense rising from a burning altar. To their neighbors in the city of Ibadan, they were the perfect couple, gentle, kind, madly in love. If love alone could birth children, Amaka and Chuka would have a dozen running around by now. They had met 5 years ago at a wedding, and by the time the bride tossed her bouquet, Chuka was already certain that the only name he wanted to call every morning was Amaka's. She too fell for his quiet strength, his laughter that warmed the air like roasted corn in rainy season, and the way he always listened, not just with his ears, but with his soul. Their union was blessed in the church and sealed with pastors' prayers. Everyone danced. Everyone rejoiced, and for the first 2 years they lived like two hearts beating as one. But 3 years had now passed, 3 long, empty years. The laughter in their home still echoed, but it was thinner now, almost brittle. Friends who once came with congratulations now came with quiet eyes and whispers too loud to ignore. She's still not pregnant. Maybe they should go and see a prophet. I hear her grandmother was barren too. The words crept like shadows into their house, even when the doors were shut. Every month Amaka lit a white candle before the wooden cross in their bedroom and knelt with hope. Every month she watched blood stain the white cloth she used to count the days. It wasn't just disappointment she felt, it was guilt, wrapped in shame, disguised as strength. And yet, every time she turned to Chuka with tearful eyes, he only pulled her close and whispered, "We're okay, my love. We have time." But time, they both knew, was beginning to shift. The silence from her womb had started echoing louder than their love songs. They tried everything. Hospital visits in the city, traditional herbs from Mama Ijeoma in the next town, fasting and midnight prayers that left their voices hoarse and their knees sore. Prophets spoke in riddles, doctors spoke in reports. But their arms remained empty, and their bed, though warm, felt like a waiting room for a miracle that refused to arrive. Still they loved, still they prayed. But something unspoken was beginning to grow between them, not anger, not blame, but a quiet fear neither dared to name. Some nights Chuka would wake up and find Amaka sitting by the window, staring at the moon like it held a secret she couldn't reach. And on one such night she whispered without turning, "Do you think the heavens are punishing me for something?" He didn't answer. He simply walked to her, held her hand and whispered, "As long as I breathe, you are enough." A few weeks later, after another test came out negative, Amaka didn't cry. She just sat still on the edge of the bed, her eyes fixed on a crack in the wall like it held the answers she'd been searching for. Chuka watched her from the doorway, his chest tight. He hated seeing her like that, frozen in silence as though every part of her was trying not to shatter. "I think we need to get away," he said softly, stepping into the room. She blinked, slowly lifting her gaze to him. "Away?" "Yes, just us. No doctors, no church vigils, no herbalists. Just peace. You and me." She wanted to protest, but the weariness in her bones agreed before her mouth could speak. Maybe some distance from the whispers, the pressure, the empty prayers would help them breathe again. And so they packed small bags and drove out of town, heading toward the quiet hills of Ibadan. Chuka had booked a modest hotel nestled between trees, where the air was crisp and the silence was honest. For the first time in months, Amaka smiled and meant it. She even laughed when Chuka tripped on a step, and he laughed too, mostly out of relief that she was finally laughing. They held hands as they walked through the hotel's corridor, room key dangling from his fingers like a promise. "This weekend," Chuka said, unlocking the door, "is just for us. No sadness allowed." But fate, as always, had other plans. It began with a scream, distant, sharp, and quickly muffled. Amaka froze mid-laugh, her face tilting toward the sound. "Did you hear?" "Shh," Chuka whispered, moving to the door. Before he could even look through the peephole, it burst open with a force that sent him sprawling backwards. 3 men stormed in, faces masked, voices sharp and cold. One slammed the door shut behind them while another kicked Chuka hard in the ribs. "Don't move," the first one barked. Amaka screamed, and a rough smack across her cheek silenced her before she could say another word. Her breath trembled. Chuka tried to rise, his hands shaking, his eyes wild with fear. "Please," he shouted, "please take everything, just don't hurt her." "Quiet," the tallest one snapped. "We came for money, not your preaching." They tore through the room, scattering their bags, yanking drawers open, flipping through their belongings like savages. Chuka quickly threw his wallet and phone on the floor. "There, that's all we have. Just go, please." But then the one with the scar across his jaw turned and stared at Amaka. His eyes lingered too long, too darkly. "This one," he whispered, smirking. "Fine woman." "No!" Chuka shouted, trying to rush forward. "Don't touch my wife!" A harsh hit to the back of his head sent him stumbling. Amaka ran to him, crying for help, but they grabbed her roughly, pulling her away. "Please stop," she sobbed. "Not in front of my husband." Her voice cracked, shaking the walls. The other 2 forced Chuka down, holding his arms, holding his face toward the horror unfolding. The cruelty broke his spirit more than the body. "Watch," Scarjaw hissed, "since you love her so much." But what happened left Amaka shattered, trembling in silence. Chuka screamed, begged, fought desperately, but the weight of the men crushed him, and worse still, the weight of helplessness crushed his soul. When the intruders were done, they laughed. One of them spat on the floor, then gave a mocking bow. "Thanks for the warm welcome, lovebirds." And then they left. The door clicked shut behind them, but the silence they left behind was louder than thunder. Amaka crawled to a corner, shaking, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her eyes stared at nothing, empty, lost. Chuka dragged himself across the floor to her, his lips trembling. "Amaka, I'm so sorry, I couldn't." But she didn't look at him. She didn't speak. Something sacred had been broken in that room, something words couldn't repair. They left the hotel before sunrise. No breakfast, no checkout, no looking back. Amaka sat in the front seat, hugging herself as if trying to keep her spirit from leaking out. Chuka drove with trembling hands, eyes fixed ahead, jaw tight. The road blurred past, but the memory stayed. Both of them carried it like a shadow that followed even in sunlight. No one spoke. The hum of the engine filled the silence that once held their laughter. Chuka had always been her protector, her safe place. But that night he had watched strangers invade their peace, hurt the woman he loved, break what was his to cherish. And even though he had fought with everything in him, something inside him had died in those minutes. He wanted to blame no one. He wanted to believe none of it was her fault. She was the victim. He knew that. But the images refused to leave. The echoes of her crying wouldn't fade. The helplessness wouldn't stop replaying. He held her when they got home. He whispered that he loved her. But a part of him, a small, painful part, had gone cold. Back home, Amaka moved like a ghost. She didn't speak unless spoken to. She barely ate. She flinched at small sounds. She walked carefully, as though the world had become sharp. Chuka tried to comfort her, but his hands wavered. His eyes no longer lingered when she walked past. His prayers grew shallow, his voice softer, his smile forced. Amaka noticed everything. She noticed how he no longer reached out for her hand, how he slept facing the wall, how he avoided her eyes like they carried the memory he was trying to erase. Worst of all, she noticed he didn't pray with her anymore, something he had always done even in their hardest days. Chuka buried himself in small tasks, fixing taps that weren't leaking, repainting walls that didn't need paint, sweeping floors twice a day. Anything to stay busy, anything to avoid sitting still with his thoughts. One afternoon, as he sat outside polishing his car for the third time that week, Amaka stood by the doorway and asked quietly, "Do you still love me, Chuka?" He froze, looked up, opened his mouth, but no answer came. She nodded slowly, tears gathering. "I feel it, the distance, the shift." He swallowed, staring at the ground. "I'm trying," he whispered. "I swear I'm trying." But trying wasn't always enough. The cracks had begun forming, not loudly but steadily, like water wearing down a rock. 2 months had passed since the hotel nightmare, and the silence in Chuka and Amaka's home had grown thicker, heavy, like smoke that refused to rise. They moved around each other carefully, gently, like strangers carrying breakable secrets. Their love, once loud, bright, and warm, had gone quiet, not because they wanted it to, but because pain had built a wall neither of them knew how to climb. Then one morning, Amaka fell ill. At first, it felt small, dizziness, nausea, weakness. She thought it was stress or grief turning into something physical. She tried to hide it, but when she collapsed in the bathroom, Chuka rushed her to the hospital, panic flooding his face even though he tried to hide it. The doctor ordered tests, asked questions, took blood. Then he returned with a smile far too bright for the moment. "Congratulations," he said cheerfully. "Amaka is pregnant." Silence, sharp, hard, unbreathable. Chuka blinked. Amaka stared at the floor. The doctor's smile faded as he looked between their expressionless faces. "You two have been trying for years, haven't you? This is good news, yes?" But no one answered, because it wasn't good news to them. Not now, not like this, not when both of them knew the timeline. Exactly 2 months had passed since the attack. Exactly 2 months since Chuka had last been with her. Now she was pregnant, and the child could not possibly be his. The drive back home was suffocating. Neither spoke. The only sound was Amaka's trembling breath and the engine humming beneath them. Chuka parked the car but didn't switch it off. His face remained forward, stiff. After a long moment, he whispered, "We can't keep it." Amaka's heart dropped. She turned slowly, voice shaking. "What?" "You heard me." His voice was flat, almost empty. "It isn't mine." "So what?" she cried. "You want me to end an innocent life? My child?" "That child," he snapped, finally meeting her eyes, "is a reminder of everything, of what happened, of my failure, of your pain." "I didn't choose this," she shouted, tears falling. "Do you think I wanted any of this? I can barely sleep, barely breathe, and now you want me to add that kind of sin to my nightmares?" He clenched his jaw, fists trembling. "I don't know how to look at you with this in your stomach." Amaka flinched, her voice cracked. "That this you're talking about is a life, a baby. After all our prayers, after all the fasting, all the tears, you want me to throw away the one thing we wanted most because of what came before it?" "It's not mine, Amaka," he shouted. "And I didn't ask for this either," she cried back. "But I won't punish a child for something evil that happened to me." Her tears wouldn't stop. "This may not be your child, Chuka, but it is inside me. And whether you stay or leave, I will not end this pregnancy." They stared at each other, both broken, both angry, both hurting. That night they slept in separate rooms. A miracle had come, but wrapped in pain. A few weeks later, Amaka stood before the mirror, her palm resting gently on her growing belly. The curve was still small, barely noticeable beneath her loose gown, but to her it was everything. A storm, a secret, a symbol of pain, and somehow a fragile spark of purpose. She hadn't stepped outside in weeks. People were beginning to wonder, but she didn't care. Her world had shrunk to 4 walls, her refuge and her prison. Chuka barely spoke to her now. He came home later and later, sometimes staying out entirely. And when he did return, he slept in the guest room. They passed each other in the hallway like shadows, present but without warmth. He didn't ask how she was feeling. He didn't touch her belly. He didn't pray with her, or for the child. But she did. Every morning, every night she whispered prayers through tears. Not just for the child, but for strength to face another day, and for love, if any piece of it still existed, to find its way back home. When she finally told her family, she forced a smile she didn't feel. It happened over the phone. Her mother had been calling, worried about her silence. So, one quiet afternoon, she pressed the phone to her ear and carefully spoke the words, "Mama, I'm pregnant." A beat of silence, then an explosion of joy. Her mother screamed, a bright, grateful scream that cracked through the phone. She shouted, cried, praised God, sang. Her sister screamed too when they found out. They began planning visits, sending names, promising wrappers and baby clothes. No one asked the question. No one knew the truth. She didn't tell them that the child came from a night she prayed every day to forget. She didn't tell them about the fear in Chuka's eyes or the cold distance in his voice. She let them believe this was the miracle they had prayed for. Maybe, just maybe, in some complicated way, it still was. Amaka stayed indoors still. The sunlight felt too bright. The world is too loud. Her body felt unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone else, but she rubbed her belly and whispered, "You didn't ask to be here, but you're here, and I will carry you, and I will love you." Some nights she heard Chuka quietly crying behind the guest room door. She never knocked. He never came out. Their hearts were no longer walking side by side. They had drifted. 2 boats cut from the same dock, sailing in opposite directions, slow but certain. Still she stood her ground, no matter what Chuka wanted, no matter what anyone might say if they knew. She was going to carry this child to full term, even if she had to do it alone. 9 long months passed, slow, heavy, silent. Her feet swelled, her back ached, her nights stretched endlessly. But not once did Amaka complain. She bore it with grace, her eyes fixed only on the life growing within her. When the labor pains finally came, Chuka drove her to the hospital without a word. He sat in the waiting room like a statue, hands clenched, eyes distant. He heard her screams from the delivery room, raw, trembling. But he didn't move. He couldn't. His body was there, but his spirit was behind a wall he didn't know how to break. Hours later, a nurse emerged with a wide smile. "Congratulations, sir. You have a healthy baby boy." Chuka nodded stiffly. When they handed him the baby wrapped in blue cloth, he stared only briefly, just long enough to see the small chest rising and falling, just long enough to hear one soft cry. His heart longed to hold the child, but his mind refused to let him feel anything. Amaka, exhausted and glowing, held the child like a precious gift. Tears filled her eyes. She whispered his name. "Chigozirim, God has blessed me." Her voice trembled. She had finally become a mother. When Amaka's mother arrived 2 days later, Chuka put on his best smile. He carried bags, helped serve food, even held the baby in front of her. Briefly, he chuckled when Mama commented on how much the baby resembled him. "He has your nose," she said, beaming. Chuka nodded, lying through his teeth. "Yes, everyone says so." But inside, guilt twisted like a knife, because though his arms held the child that day, his heart still stood at a distance. 2 years passed. Chigozirim began to walk, babbling words only his mother understood. He had big, curious eyes, a laughter that could melt stones, and the kind of joy only children possess. Amaka raised him with all the love in her. Chuka was there, present but not fully. He sometimes sat with the boy, helped feed him, even bounced him on his lap once or twice, but it was always forced, awkward, like wearing someone else's shoes. Amaka never pushed. She knew better than to beg a man to love his own child. Then one day, Chigozirim fell sick. At first it was fever, then vomiting. Then he couldn't walk. Amaka rushed him to the hospital, panic choking her breath. Chuka followed, silent as ever, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. The doctor frowned after examining the boy. "He needs a blood transfusion," he said gravely. "Immediately. We've started fluids, but we need a donor fast." Chuka's eyes widened. "But he's not mine." Amaka turned sharply, tears in her eyes. The doctor blinked, confused. "I'll do it," Chuka added quickly, avoiding their gaze. Let's rule me out and move fast." They drew his blood and took it for testing. Chuka waited, pacing, trying to act calm. He knew this wouldn't work. It couldn't. This child, beautiful as he was, wasn't his. Not by blood. He was doing this only to avoid the whispers, to avoid the shame of not even trying. 20 minutes later, the nurse returned with wide eyes. "Sir, your blood matches perfectly." Chuka froze. "What?" "You're a direct match," she said, confirming. "We can begin the transfusion now." Chuka stared at her, then at Amaka, then down the corridor where his son, lay weak and whimpering. His knees buckled and he sat down heavily on the bench. Amaka approached him cautiously, unsure what to say. "Chuka, I don't understand," he whispered, almost to himself. "They said it couldn't be mine. I didn't touch you for months before, after what happened." "I know," she said gently. "I know what the dates looked like. But God had other plans." Tears filled his eyes as the truth hit him like thunder. This child, Chigozirim, was his blood, his flesh, his miracle. Not the product of violence or shame, but of something deeper, something divine, something beyond human understanding. He stood, wiped his eyes, and walked down the corridor with a new purpose. He held Chigozirim's tiny hand as the doctors began the transfusion. The boy's skin was hot, but he opened his eyes and managed a weak smile. "Papa," he whispered. For the first time in 2 years, Chuka's heart fully broke and fully healed. He leaned forward and kissed his son's forehead. "Yes, my son, I'm here." Later that night, as Chigozirim slept peacefully, Chuka sat beside Amaka and reached for her hand. No words were spoken, but tears fell freely. Not of sorrow, but of release. Their love had been buried, but it was not dead. It was waiting for the truth, waiting for grace, waiting for a child named Chigozirim to remind them that even after pain, after doubt, after silence, God still blesses. And sometimes miracles come, wrapped in confusion, clothed in mystery, but full of purpose. Sometimes life's greatest blessings are hidden in our darkest moments. Even when love is shaken and hope seems lost, faith, patience, and the courage to hold on can lead us to miracles we never expected. So what do you think about Chuka's actions? If you were Chuka, would you have accepted the child? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's discuss. And if this story touched your heart like it did to mine, remind someone today that love, no matter how broken, can be mended. Share this video with someone who needs a little hope, a little healing, and a reminder that God still writes the most beautiful stories from the most painful chapters. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more heart-stirring stories that celebrate love, faith, and the strength of the human spirit. Your support keeps these stories alive.